Raids in Guild Wars 2 are probably my favorite content in the entire game. They can really challenge you to take your gameplay to the next level, they're great for making gold, and taking down a hard boss with other people can be incredibly satisfying. Unfortunately, getting into raids for the first time can be somewhat daunting. You open up the LFG and just... gosh, what do all of these terms even mean? If I mess something up, will the other players burn my house down with a big searing cauldron? The first year raids were in the game, I was too scared to even try them. I thought that stuff would be way too difficult for me. I will just chill out here in open world and you guys go do the spooky scary raids. And now, 5 years later, I've killed almost 2000 raid bosses. I'm doing Doom CM at 4 AM and I cannot stop. Please send help. Turns out, the raids themselves are actually really fun and are really not as hard as I thought. But even knowing where to start and finding yourself a group, that's the hard part. So today, I am here to help you get into raids. We'll talk about why raids might be worth your time, how to prepare yourself, and most importantly, how to find yourself a group. A group of nice people, where nobody will yell at you if you do something wrong. Seriously, it's just a game. I understand being passionate, but screw people that yell at you for making a mistake. Let's get started. First of all, let's talk about the why. Why would you go through this whole process and get into this spooky game mode? There are basically 3 reasons. Fun, gold, and gear. They are kinda straightforward reasons, but let's talk about them anyway. Raids are really fun. There are few things that I find as enjoyable as sitting in a Discord call with friends and fighting a raid boss together. I've made some lifelong friends through raids. Next up is gold. Raids are actually really profitable if you get good at them. Each raid boss gets you 2 golds and some loot, and challenge modes even up that number to 4 golds. There's also 1 raid wing each week with double rewards. A weekly full clear with some challenge modes can easily get you over 100 gold in a couple of hours, and you can use that gold to craft lots of shiny legendaries. Finally, there is also gear. Raids basically throw Ascended gear at you, and if you become an active raider, getting Ascended gear becomes kind of a non-issue. Besides Ascended gear, raids are also a way towards getting your legendary armor, which you can use on multiple characters at once, transmute for free, and stat swap for free. It is so useful. Infinite fashion! This allows you to play the true endgame. Alright, I am sure that Infinite Fashion has convinced you to start raiding. Let's talk about what you should do to get started. First of all, I guess it's good to know what content there is for you to do. There are currently 7 different raid wings in Guild Wars 2. 4 of these are from Heart of Thorns and 3 of these are from Path of Fire. In a lot of other MMOs, all their raids become kind of irrelevant as time goes on. The gear they drop is not really good anymore, and people tend to just blaze through the old raids with their high-level characters. That is not the case in Guild Wars 2. In Guild Wars 2, the level cap and gear cap stay the same over time, which means that all old raids are still being played. They still give you good gear and they still give you good goals. The Heart of Thorns raids, which are Wing 1 through Wing 4, are generally considered to be the easiest ones. Wing 1 and Wing 4 especially are kind of considered to be the beginner raids, and I highly recommend you start with those. Path of Fire raids tend to be a little bit harder, because their mechanics tend to be a bit more complicated. I know loads of people who love the Heart of Thorns raids, but just kind of avoid the Path of Fire ones. Alright, so we'll do Heart of Thorns raids first. Now it is time for you to pick a role to play. I can practically hear some of you think right now, DPS, healer or tank? Well, actually, Guild Wars 2 is a little bit more complicated than most other MMOs. The game doesn't really have the typical DPS, healer, tank, holy trinity, but it also kinda does. It's just different. It's actually kind of complicated. Let me explain. The first role we're gonna talk about is the healer. They heal. It's very obvious. Healing in Guild Wars 2 is actually pretty different from healing in a lot of other MMOs. Instead of playing whack-a-mole with players' UI health bars, most healing in Guild Wars 2 is AoE. So you mostly just look when your group gets low, and then if they do, you puke some healing on the team. Yes, I literally mean that. You puke some healing on the team, that's what it looks like. Healers also bring buffs to the team. When making a raid squad, there are two buffs or boons which you kind of want to be thinking about: quickness and alacrity. A healer usually brings one of these, so there are quickness healers and alacrity healers. Healing in Guilty 2 is very fun, but it is also a role with a lot of responsibility. If you stop pressing your buttons, everyone in your team will die. That is actually why I like playing healer. It makes me feel in control. Your life is in my hands. Next up, we have DPS. They are also pretty straightforward. They just stand at the boss and hit the boss as hard as they can. The key to being an effective DPS is pressing your buttons really fast. Not kidding, by the way, that is actually pretty good advice. The more skills you cast, the more damage you will do. Of course, pressing your buttons in a smart order is really useful as well, but you would be surprised at how many people just kinda press their buttons too slowly. DPS players in a raid will usually take full damage glass cannon gear, because they don't really need the survivability. In open worlds, being a bit tanky is very useful, but in raids you have a healer who will take care of you, so you might as well go full glass cannon and do as much damage as possible. There are also some raid bosses where the person with the most toughness stat gets the boss aggro, so if you don't actually want to become the tank, going full glass cannon tends to be a pretty good move. Besides DPS, we also have the so-called boon DPS. These are basically DPS players, but they sacrifice a little bit of their damage to buff their teammates with either the quickness buff or the alacrity buff. Remember how I said that the healer usually brings one of these? In Guild Wars 2, most support skills will affect 5 people, a party, but in a raid we have 10 people. So to make sure that everyone gets affected by support skills evenly, we basically split up the raid squad into 2 parties of 5. Each of these parties of 5 will need a healer and also the other buff. If you have an alacrity healer in your group, add a quickness boon DPS. If you have a quickness healer in your group, then you add an alacrity boon DPS. Simple, you always want to have quickness and alacrity. Once you have your healer and the other boon, you can just fill the rest of your group with DPS players. Now you pretty much know everything you need to know to form a raid group. Nice. But wait, who is the tank? Who is leading the bosses around and keeping aggro? Guild Wars 2 tanking is pretty different from what you might be used to from other MMOs. Usually we just kinda let the healer do it. As if the healers don't have enough to worry about already. Keeping the team alive, giving boons, doing mechanics, tanking. In Guild Wars 2, we just let the healer do everything. For real though, letting the healer do the tanking in Guild Wars 2 just kind of makes a little sense. Different raid bosses have different ways in which they determine who gets aggro, and honestly, kind of anyone can tank as long as they can survive. The healer tends to be a pretty good choice, because they can just heal themselves and they can easily take some extra survivability stats without having to sacrifice damage. Alright, so we have talked about the different roles now, but which one should you play? Honestly, you should probably play whichever role sounds the most fun to you. If you're looking for the most beginner-friendly role, you're probably looking at DPS. I know DPS can seem a bit spooky with people running DPS meters and all, but usually the DPS player has the least amount of responsibility. If you die, it's fine, you're just a DPS. If the healer dies, that is when a team is kinda screwed. DPS also tends to be very easy to gear, which also makes it a good choice for beginners. That being said though, you can also totally start as a healer or as a boon DPS. Now that you've picked your role, it is time for you to pick your builds. What kind of skills, traits and gear do you run? Guild Wars 2 is a game with a massive amount of freedom when it comes to building your character, so it can be a little bit overwhelming. Right now, the 2 most popular websites for finding yourself a raid build are snowcrust.com and the instance content section of heartstuck.gg. On these websites, you will find loads of battle-tested builds for all roles and all classes. There are loads to choose from. Some builds are listed as easy and some are listed as hard, so you can pick whatever difficulty you are in the mood for. Snowcrust.com also has a beginner section with builds that are very easy to learn and execute. But Lara, what if I want to make my own builds? You can totally do that. But speaking from experience, making a good raid build in Guild Wars 2 can be pretty hard. There are just so many options. It's really easy to just kind of make a bad build. There is a reason that I named this Catalyst build I made Bad Catalyst. If you really want to make your own build though, a good idea could be to start with a build from these websites and then tweak it a bit to your liking. Now that you have a build, you will also need gear. Gosh, gearing is a huge topic and I could probably make a whole video about it. Actually, I probably should do that. That could be a pretty useful video. If you want a gear guide video, let me know in the comments. To get started with raids, you do not need the best gear. Unlike fractals, agony resistance is just not a thing in raids. You do not need to get full Ascended gear. Exotics will do just fine, and exotic gear is pretty cheap to purchase on the trading post. Popular stat combinations are Berserkers for power DPS, Vipers for Conny DPS, and Harriers for healers. That being said, if you are getting into raids, I highly recommend looking into getting yourself Ascended weapons and Ascended trinkets. You do not need these to get started, but they are significant improvements over exotic weapons and trinkets. You will notice the difference of these. Ascended armor is a much smaller difference stat-wise, so Ascended armor is not really that worth bothering with. Ascended weapons are pretty cheap to craft nowadays. You can also get Ascended weapons from some collections, or you can buy them with raid, strike, or fractal currency. Ascended trinkets can be gotten in loads of different ways. If you are going for Berserker stats, you can get some Ascended trinkets super easily with laurels. For other stat types, I recommend you check out the Living Vault Season 3 maps. Each map in Season 3 has a currency you can collect, and you can spend that currency on trinkets. Bitterfrost Frontier is especially awesome, because you can buy Ascended back pieces here, and there is no limit to how many of the currency you can gather each day. If you have several characters, you can go gather in Bitterfrost on all your characters and get Ascended trinkets really fast. If you have access to Biora Marches from the Iceboost Saga, I also recommend doing the collection The Hunger. After doing this collection, the Kodan in this little house will sell you cheap Ascended amulets for a Biora currency and karma. Alright, your gear is ready and your build is ready too. What else is there to do? Before going into a raid, it is probably also smart to roughly figure out how your build works. The builds you will find on Hearthstone.gg and Snowcoast.com also contain a section with an explanation. Sometimes I find the ones on Snowcoast.com to be pretty short, so I highly recommend checking out the guides on both websites. For healing builds, the guide will probably tell you which skills you should be using in which situation. For DPS builds, there is often a rotation listed, which should give you an idea of what buttons to press. But oh my gosh, Lara, how am I supposed to remember this? It's like 40 steps! You're completely right. These DPS rotations tend to look pretty spooky. Now, first of all, you do not have to execute these rotations perfectly. You only have to do that if you're trying to be a world-class speedrunner. But if you're just trying to clear a raid boss, it does not have to be perfect at all. Still though, these rotations can give you a rough idea on how you could smartly press your buttons. I like to watch rotation videos, and then I just roughly, vaguely copy what they're doing. And honestly, that usually works pretty well for me. If DPS rotations still scare you a little bit though, I highly recommend looking at the easy or beginner builds on these websites. These tend to be very easy to play, and doing well with them is not complicated at all. I will give you an example. How to get good fast and do loads of damage on Power Rifle Mechanists. Press all of your weapon skills, including your mech skills, off cooldown. Whenever you use skill 2, go into your grenade kit and also press grenade 2. While you're there, you can also press grenade 4 or grenade 5 if one of them happens to be off cooldown. Then go back to rifle and continue pressing all your skills off cooldown. Bam! Easy 30k DPS. Playing DPS really doesn't have to be that hard. If you want to, you can definitely play a build with a long, complicated rotation, but don't be afraid to just try some of the easy builds. I'm actually thinking about doing a video series of short, easy build explanations. I think a lot of guys tend to be a bit overwhelming if you're new, so just short, quick explanations that get you 90% of the way there seem pretty useful. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see more Get Good Fast videos. Alright, now we are fully prepared. You have a build, you have gear, you know about the different raid wings, and you know how to roughly play your builds. Just the last thing you need is a group. As a new raider, your best bet to get into raids is probably to look for a training group. Training groups are exactly what they sound like. They're there to teach you how to race. In a training session, the group usually targets one specific wing or one specific boss. Sometimes there is an experienced trainer explaining the mechanics, and other times it is a group where everyone is new and trying to figure it out together. But how do you find one of these training groups? It is pretty common for guilds to organize their own trainings. For example, my community guild Lala has a bunch of cool trainers regularly organizing them in our Discord. Besides those, there are also dedicated training guilds out there, like Raid Training Initiative and Raid Academy, which are purely focused on organizing trainings. There are also streamers who like to do trainings on stream, including me. She'll start murdering the person that's currently the tank. This is actually very exhausting. There's water in these bottles. Hey, hello, follow me on Twitch. The stream is very cool, I swear. It's also good to know that if you vaguely know some people in the game, you can always create your own beginner group. That is what I did. One day, me and some friends were bored, and we just randomly asked people in guild chat if they wanted to try a raid. And that is how A Music Guild Tries to Raid was born. I do understand though that organizing your own group can seem a little bit daunting. But what if you don't want to join a guild or go outside of the game to a Discord server? What if you just want to find people in-game quickly? Well, that's why we have the LFG. I would say that the LFG is a mixed bag. It is definitely possible to have a good experience on there, and I've met some really nice people through LFG, but it can also be very hostile if you are a new player. The Raids LFG consists of two categories, experienced and training. In the experienced category, people often put up kill-proof requirements, and you are kind of expected to know how the boss mechanics work. People in this category usually just want to get their weekly kill, and do not want to spend time explaining things. Not so great if you are just getting started. As a new raider, you might have more luck in the training category, which has a lot of people willing to explain to you what's going on. There are actually training groups in this category, but they tend to fill up pretty quickly, so it can seem pretty empty if you don't stick around for long. By the way, it is worth noting that you don't have to purely learn the raid bosses through trainings. You can also decide to look up guides. Heartstuck.gg and Snowcrystals.com both have really good written raid boss guides, and I also really like Muglock's Get to the Point videos, which explain the raid bosses really quickly. It can definitely be useful to prepare a little bit for the bosses beforehand, especially if you're trying your luck on LFG. Oh, and here's another tip. If you are still new, do not sleep on strike missions. I know this is a raiding guide, but strike missions are basically just easy standalone raid bosses. LFG groups for strike missions tend to be a lot more chill and a lot more friendly to newbies, so giving strike missions on LFG a roll before you try raids might be a really good idea. Do make sure though to avoid these strike LFGs that say CM in their title. Those are challenge mode strikes, and those actually tend to be harder than raids. I know the raiding community can seem like a really hostile, elitist place, but there's a lot of really nice people out there too. You might have to put in some effort to find them, but gosh, it is so worth it. And that is all my advice for getting into raids. I hope it was useful and that you now have somewhat of an idea on how to get started. If you want to see more Guild Wars 2 and MMO content, subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, the best way to ask me is over on my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/Nomancy. I am live 5 nights a week and I am always down to chat about this stuff. Also, you should join our Discord. It's filled with really nice Guild Wars 2 people and we also do training sometimes. Alright, that's it. Thank you for watching and see you next time.